And many of these companies end up getting absorbed into big Fortune 100 companies and end up being the products that those big companies sell. And my focus primarily is building the intellectual property that protects and adds value to these pharmaceutical or biotechnology or medical device or even virtual health software based assets. And today we're going to talk a little bit about why intellectual property, in particular patents, are important to the life science industry, especially in the pharmaceutical industry where patents really reign supreme. But first, I just want to say something about dealing with lawyers, because in your internship, especially if you're working at a big company or a big institution like a university, there are going to be lots of lawyers. They're going to be everywhere. You can't avoid them no matter how hard you try. Behind every tree, under every rock, there is a lawyer making trouble about something. In the professional world, lawyers are going to blend into the professional tapestry and for the most part be indistinguishable from the other corporate officers and corporate executives that you're going to deal with. They're part of a team. They serve a function in advancing a program, advancing a product. Really, it's something very different than lawyers that you may have encountered in your life. If at some point in your life you were involved in a lawsuit or some kind of a dispute, that's a very different kind of lawyer than someone who works in an executive capacity in a large company or a large institution. They're more business-oriented lawyers than lawyers who want to get in a fist fight to try to strong arm the other side into giving in. But you will encounter one thing with big company and big institutional lawyers, and that is the lawyer is the person whose job primarily is to de-risk the program, de-risk the product, and protect the company, keep the product, keep its employees safe. And the number one mechanism by which lawyers do that is to say no to things. When people come to the lawyer and say, we really think that the company should be doing this with the product, the lawyer is very apt to say, no, we can't do that. And if you're lucky, the lawyer will explain why. Frequently they won't. Sometimes they even can't. Sometimes the reason why you can't do something or why the company cannot do something is a very secret thing. But for the most part, the lawyer's job is to protect the venture, not so much to create value. The business people, the technology people, the people working in the laboratories, they're the ones who build value, and the lawyers are really going to be the ones protecting the value. So you may encounter a little tug of war between the business captains and the laboratory scientists who want to push this product and enhance the value, and the lawyer's saying, well, there are reasons why we shouldn't be doing that. Maybe that is really valuable, but you know what? It's a little risk there that I really don't want to have to explain to the CEO, so we can't do that. And if you do find yourself dealing with a corporate lawyer, the best thing you can always do is think through the risks ahead of time and be able to explain what you perceive the risks to be and how you can attenuate those risks, because those are going to be the primary concerns in the back of the lawyer's mind, whether the lawyer articulates that or not. And the lawyer may very well not be as conversant with the product or the technology as you are, or the scientific team is, or the marketing team is. And sometimes when a lawyer says no, sometimes it's because of a disconnect. Sometimes it's because the lawyer's legal language and the scientist's technical language, there's no nexus there. And if you can come to the attorney prepared to fill that nexus and help the attorney understand why what you want is value adding and why it's maybe not as risky as the lawyer is inclined to think it is, you'll get a lot farther. So it's always important to make sure that you are speaking the same business language as the attorney. And oftentimes that's where things fall through. The lawyer's thinking about risk, the lawyer's thinking about law, the scientist is thinking about this new great surprising discovery. Come prepared to explain how to translate one into the other. And now we're going to go on into the more specific topic of the session, and I'm going to share my screen. Can we all see that? All right.
Yes.
Great. So we're going to talk about why are drugs patented? Why do companies spend so much effort and so much money to get patents to protect their drugs? And this also applies to medical devices. It applies to life science software. It applies to virtual health. It even applies to many industries outside of life science. But the pharmaceutical industry is definitely where patents reign supreme. There is just no such thing as a successful pharmaceutical product that is not protected by patents, plural, multiple patents. So what is a patent? Well, a patent is a temporary exclusive right to some product, some technology, something that a company has created and ideally would like to market for profitability. What the patent gives the owner of the patent is the ability to block others from doing certain things. And this is the subtlety of the patent that people, the public at large, tends not to appreciate. The patent doesn't actually give you the right to do anything. What the patent does is it takes powers away from everyone in the world who doesn't own that patent. Anyone in the world who doesn't own that patent cannot make the product that is protected by that patent, use the product that is protected by that patent, sell or attempt to sell or advertise or market the product protected by that patent, or import that product or that technology into the United States. Now, every country has its own patent system. The United States can only grant a patent in the borders of the United States. Canada grants its own patents. France grants its own patents. Every major industrialized nation has a system like this, but they are finite. These patents tend to last for about 20 years. There are specific cases where a patent might be a little bit longer or a little bit shorter than that. But a 20-year period where you can stop other companies, other institutions, other business initiatives from making, using, selling, or importing the product that is protected by this patent. And that's what makes it so valuable, because it gives you what is basically a monopoly on that product. And with the ability to stop others from selling that drug, with the ability to stop others from selling that medical product, well, you're the only game in town. You're the only company selling that product. You can sell it for a higher price and be much more profitable until that 20-year clock runs out. And that's when generics enter the market and there are competitors and prices go down. So a patent is really a deal with the federal government. What you're going to do is you're going to prepare a document, a patent application, which is really very technical in nature. There's a lot of deep scientific information in a patent application. A good patent application should have the level of technical detail of the supporting information of a high impact peer-reviewed journal article. And the deal you make with the government is this: the government is going to publish that information that you provide. The government is going to publish the information on your technology, how you made the technology, how you use the technology, what the technology does, what data you have. It's all going to end up out there in the public at some point. And in exchange for that, you have the opportunity to negotiate for these exclusive rights that we discussed on the prior slide. Notice I said you have the opportunity to negotiate for. You don't automatically get it. Just because you submit all this information to the United States Patent Office doesn't mean that you necessarily will be granted these powers, but you have the opportunity to negotiate and prove to the Patent Office that you should be entitled to these powers. But whether you win or lose, all that information is still going to end up in the public. And that's really the deal you're making with the government. In exchange for the opportunity to have this awesome economic monopoly on this technology for about 20 years, you are going to advance the body of science by publishing your discoveries. There are two main reasons why patents exist, and they are both tied to the same goal. The same goal is, would big companies even bother investing hundreds of millions of dollars developing a product if patents did not exist? Well, the number one reason is cost recovery. Taking a drug from a lead program all the way to a drug that is ready to launch easily cost a pharmaceutical company hundreds of millions, maybe even $1 billion or more dollars. If that company doesn't have some mechanism to help it recover that $1 billion, then why would any company spend $1 billion to develop that product? No one ever would. Without the ability to recover those costs, there would be no new discoveries in the pharmaceutical industry. It would be cost prohibitive. So the ability to create that monopoly and sell a high priced product to recover the costs very quickly is the number one reason why patents exist, and most importantly, in the pharmaceutical industry, why they are necessary. And number two, an economic incentive to innovate. Once the owner of the patent has recovered all of their costs that went in to develop the product, then there is the opportunity to earn a lot of profit by continuing to utilize that monopoly granted by the patent until the patent expires. And this is why you hear about patents providing drugs that are worth $1 billion a year or more to large pharmaceutical companies. If you watch business news channels, you might hear newscasters talking frantically about big drugs going off patent and what does this company have in their pipeline after this $1 billion a year drug goes off patent. And the reason why companies are so anxious about drugs losing their patents is because once they do, that company no longer has the ability to block others from selling that drug. And that's when the generic pharmaceutical companies move into the market. Once there's a scenario in which 5 different companies are selling that drug, then prices drop. Instead of selling a drug for $1,000 a course, the company might start selling that drug for $50 a course. So the end of the patent, it's a big deal for the company, and what the company needs to do is develop a new drug that will have new patents and will go back to the realm of $1 billion a year drug selling for $1,000 a course. This is what keeps the pharmaceutical industry going. A lot of people pose the question, why patent? If patenting requires revealing all of our technology in the form of a publication, and we're not guaranteed a patent, we have to negotiate for it, we're taking a risk that we're going to spill the beans about the technology and never have anything economic to show for it for having taken that risk. So why not just keep everything a secret? Why not rely entirely on trade secrets? Why don't pharmaceutical companies, why don't biotechnology companies just not reveal what they're doing, get the drug approved, and start selling it? And the answer is because that has been tried and it doesn't work. for a number of reasons. Number one, for companies who are in the growth stage, investors are not excited by trade secrets. Patents get investments. Trade secrets do not generate investments in the pharmaceutical industry. And second is just the practice of reverse engineering. Once that product is out there on the market, any competitor can obtain it, put it in their laboratories, study it, research it, find out everything that's in it. And once the competitor knows that information, if the product is not protected by a patent, they can just start selling it. So really, in the pharmaceutical industry, there's no such thing as relying on trade secrets. Eventually, generic companies have really the best drug formulators in the world. You hand a chemist at a generic pharmaceutical company a drug dosage form and don't even tell them what's in it, they'll figure it out. They will figure out what is in that pill. They will figure out how to make it. They might even be able to figure out how to make it better. There is no hiding what's in that pharmaceutical product once it's out there in the public. And that's why you need the patent. You need a hammer to stamp out your competitors who are trying to sell your product. The public has some misconceptions about the way patents work, and I'd just like to disabuse those. These are things that I hear from people all the time when I first speak to them about patents. It is actually entirely possible for two companies, two universities, two startups, two entities of any kind, both to have patents on the same product, on the same technology, on the same molecule, on the same antibody. This happens all the time. Just because you have a patent on something does not mean that there's not another company out there who doesn't have a patent on the same thing. And it's really important to know that when you're going into business, because if someone else has a patent on your product, then they can use their patent to stop you. They can use their patent to stop you from selling or advertising your product. And that's a real tough situation to be in when someone else has a patent on your product, and it happens all the time. And one of the jobs of the legal department of a large company is to find out who else has those patents and figure out a legal strategy for dealing with them. Number two, owning a patent doesn't protect you from other people's patents. Just because we have a patent on a product doesn't mean that other people can't use their patents against us. Number three, you don't need to be making money on something to be attacked with someone else's patents. In reality, in the pharmaceutical industry, the biggest lawsuits tend to be filed when the competitor company hasn't made a penny of revenue yet. So that there's this misbelief out there in the public that you can only get sued with a patent if you're making lots and lots of money on something. Not true at all. Many companies who are revenue zero do face attacks from other people's patents. And finally, the patent does not actually give your company the right to do anything. Just because, other than exclude others from using your technology. But just because you have a patent on a product doesn't necessarily mean that you can go ahead and sell it, especially in the pharmaceutical industry. It's the FDA that decides whether you can sell your product, not the patent office. Even if your product is not a drug, if your product is some kind of electronic device, there might be certain engineering specifications that your product needs to meet before you can start selling it. So the patent office, just having the patent, doesn't necessarily mean that you can start looking for customers and distributing that product. So what can we patent? There are a lot of myths out there about what people can and cannot get patents on. And the answer is pretty simple. In the world of life science, and I don't just mean pharmaceuticals, in life science, any technology that makes people's lives better, you can patent just about anything useful as long as you have the right strategy. And here are examples of things that are patented all the time. The most tractable things, the easiest things to relate to that are patented are drugs, biotechnologies, medical devices. But in reality, there are lots of other things that people patent all the time too that people might not think about. Patenting is common in the cosmetics industry. It's fairly common in the consumer products industry. A lot of people will give you terrible advice and tell you that diagnostics or medical software cannot be patented. And that's just wrong. It is a patent urban legend that the United States government has terminated the ability to patent software. It's just a big stinking lie. If you ever hear that from anyone, it's just not the truth. The truth is you need the right strategy. And I say this to people all the time. When a lawyer tells you that it's not possible to get a patent on medical software, what that really means is you're talking to a lawyer who doesn't know how to get a patent on medical software. It all comes down to what is your strategy. And in the life science industry, all of these things will at some point seek patent protection because it's much safer for the company to protect the product with a patent than it is with trade secrets. And if the company is at a stage where they rely on investors, investors get excited about patents. Investors don't get excited about trade secrets, especially for medical devices or consumer products. I mean, you go to the store, you buy one, take it home, take it apart, and you know how it works. There's no maintaining a trade secret in a mechanical device. An engineer just reverse engineers it and figures out how it works. The only way to protect against that is with a patent. There is no law that blocks people from reverse engineering your product. You need a patent to prevent people from using that information to knock off your product. Now, oftentimes, when people think about patents, they think, especially in the pharmaceutical industry, they think, well, back when I was a sophomore in college, I remember I took this organic chemistry class, and the professor used to go to the board and draw all these fancy diagrams with hexagons and little lines projecting out from the hexagon with letters on it like F or Cl or Me, explaining what atoms were connected to the hexagon. And sometimes you'd have a drawing with a double bond or a triple bond or a nitrogen atom or something like that. And when people think about pharmaceutical patents, they think about that. They think about getting a patent on that chemical drawing of the drug. And that is ordinarily the first kind of patent that someone obtains on a drug. We refer to that in the industry as the composition of matter patent. But what people often don't realize, and unfortunately, a lot of people in the pharmaceutical industry often don't realize, that there is so much more to patent about a drug than just that sawhorse diagram that you learned in sophomore organic chemistry. You can have many patents on a pharmaceutical product that protect it in various different ways. So we've got our pharmaceutical product here in this mortar and pestle, and we want to protect it. There are all kinds of other kinds of patents that we can get that will provide protection for the product in other creative ways. The composition of matter, the use in therapy, these are common patents that pretty much everyone in the industry knows to get. But what about when you take that raw molecule and figure out how are we going to put this molecule into a form that people can actually take it? Nobody just eats a raw drug. It gets formulated in a very specific way with buffers or with tablet binders. All the other stuff you mix with the drug to put it into a form that a human can take it, that formulation, you can get a patent on that. That protects the drug too. How much drug goes in that pill, the dosage amount, you can get a patent on that. You can get a patent on the amount of the drug that is used in each dose. The blood profile. When the drug gets into the human being's body and starts circulating around through the circulatory system, what is the concentration of the blood in that person's plasma? You can get a patent on that. If the drug is administered orally and goes into the stomach, how long does it take for that drug formulation to dissolve in the stomach acid? You can get a patent on that. Does this drug give less of a side effect than other drugs of the same class are known to give? You can get a patent on that. Does this drug work differently whether you take it before, after, or during a meal? Does the drug work differently whether you take it in the morning or in the evening? You can get a patent on that. You can be very creative to find as many different ways as possible to protect that new development. You don't just have to stop at the patent on the fancy chemical drawing that you used to look at in sophomore organic chemistry. There's a lot more patent protection out there than just the old-fashioned composition of matter. Now, patent timelines. How long do these things last? Well, when you first want to begin the patenting process, you're going to start by filing something called a provisional patent application. And that provisional patent application lasts for 1 year. And during that year, you can update, revise, edit, do whatever you want to that provisional patent application to make it better. You can even run more experiments and add those experiments to the provisional patent application up until the 1 year date when you will file two things: your United States non-provisional patent application and an international patent application. At this point, your patent application is set in stone. You don't get to make revisions anymore. The non-provisional patent application is the one that ends up on a patent examiner's desk at the United States Patent Office, gets examined, gets negotiated, and ideally eventually becomes a patent that protects your product and makes it worth $1 billion a year. The international patent application is what preserves your right to seek patent protection in all countries other than the United States. Here, then, a year and a half from our 0 point, this is when your patent applications get published and become public knowledge and are available to anyone who goes looking for them. At about 2.5 years down the road from our 0 point, this is where we're going to choose what countries other than the United States we would like to patent in. About 3 to 5 years down the road, this is when we start to get patents in the United States. And a single provisional patent application can give rise to any number of patents. Just because you filed one provisional patent application or even one non-provisional patent application does not mean that you will only get one patent. You might get 1, you might get 5, you might get 10, you might get 30. The question is, how much money does your company want to spend at the patent office? As long as you keep writing checks to the patent office, they will indulge your requests. And as long as you can keep negotiating and winning, they will grant you patent after patent after patent if you're willing to pay for it. And the question is, where do you draw the line on those expenses? Because it does eventually become laborious. Farther down the road, now we'll start to get patents granted outside the United States. And sure, this takes a long time. But I'll tell you what, the only thing in the world that is slower than the patent office is the FDA. Compared to the FDA, this timeline's actually pretty fast. So as slow as it looks, you will probably have patents granted before the drug is actually approved for sale by the FDA. Then at about year 21, and again, this can vary a little bit, but about 21 years after our 0 point, all of these patents will expire and will go away, and generic competitors will be able to enter the marketplace, unless the company also has other patents on this product, as we'll look into a little bit on the slide after this one. So the United States can only give you a patent in the United States, but for a large company, a large major life science corporation, having a patent just in the United States is not enough. Definitely in the life science industry, you at least want to have patents in Europe, Japan, and China. South Korea has become a very, very valuable market in life science over the last few years. Interestingly, other than the United States, the most valuable countries are also the most difficult patent countries in which to obtain a patent and are the most expensive areas in which to obtain a patent. You don't let that dissuade you. The value of the pharmaceutical product, the value of the biotech product, the value of the medical device is too high to let these costs and these challenges slow you down. And I'll tell you something, when you're looking at the costs of these patents, if you think lawyers are expensive, translators make us look like a bargain. Legal, technical translators, these are people who have the skills to take a legal and scientific document and translate it from English into the language that would be required in one of the international patent offices. That's where the money goes in this process, not to the lawyers, to the translators. That's a serious business. If you can translate science, if you can translate technology, that is a big market business. So how do our patents align with the development of the drug? It's really important to make sure that we still have patents going by the time our drug gets through the FDA. If all of our patents expire before the drug gets through the FDA, then the drug is totally unprotected. So we always have to be mindful about how our patent lifeline, that 20 or 21-year patent lifeline, lines up with our regulatory timeline. How quickly are things moving through the clinic? Obviously, the faster things move through the clinic, the shorter that red arrow is, the more patent protection you're going to have. Alternatively, if there are things that we could do to make that blue arrow move farther out to the right to extend beyond the red arrow, to extend beyond the launch date, that would be good too. And there are two ways to do that. Number one, file new patent applications. Let's say on that timeline, in that drug development timeline, in year 5, we change the formulation of the drug. We decide, you know what, citrate buffer isn't the best way to formulate this drug. We're going to use phosphate buffer. Go get a patent on formulating that drug in phosphate buffer. And we file that patent application in year 5. That patent's going to have a timeline of 20 or 21 years. So that arrow would go out to year 25, even farther into the future, farther beyond the clinical development timeline, pushing that patent protection as far out into the future as possible will improve the value of the drug asset. And then there's something else. There's this little bonus that the FDA gives us. Since the drug spends so much time in the clinic and the drug spends so much time being reviewed by the FDA for approval, the FDA actually does you a big favor. The FDA gives you a coupon in which the FDA gives you extra time to attach to the end of one of your patents. And how much time you get depends upon how much time you spend in the clinic and how much time you spend in regulatory red tape. The longer time you spend, the bigger your coupon is. And the FDA will give you a coupon that ranges anywhere from 0 to 5 years. And that coupon can be added to any one of your patents that protects that drug and extends the life of the patent by that time. In practice, that coupon tends to be worth about 2 or 2.5 years. It's not normal that you actually get an extra 5 years, but in theory, by the letter of the law, it is possible. And that is hugely valuable because if you get a coupon that's worth 2 years for a big drug, that's another $2 billion in sales. And that's just immensely valuable. What do we need to be able to do to get a patent? Well, we need more than just an idea. It has to be something more than just a plan. We do need to have some experimental basis. And we don't need data when we file the provisional patent application, but eventually we do. We can't patent something in nature. If you find a new drug in a plant, you can't patent the chemical structure of the drug, but you might be able to patent the use of the drug in therapy. You might be able to patent a formulation of the drug that you made in the laboratory. You find a drug in a plant, combine it with a little aspirin. Hey, if the combination of that drug and aspirin does not exist in nature, you've got yourself a new pharmaceutical product. But getting a patent is actually not as demanding as some of the things that you might encounter in the academic or other regulatory world. For example, the burden of proof that your drug actually does what you say it does, in the patent office, that burden is not nearly as high as it is in the FDA. The FDA requires much, much more proof that the drug actually works than the patent office does. As far as your understanding of your own technology, to get a patent, you don't have to understand your own technology even as well as you would need to understand it to publish it in a high impact journal. The patent office does not require that you fully understand your mechanism of action. The patent office does not require that you know how your product works. You need to be able to explain what it is, what it does, and how you use it and how you make it. But you don't have to know why it does what it does. A lot of big shot journals would want to know why your technology does what it does. The patent office doesn't ask you that question. And your patent doesn't necessarily have to be something tangible. It can be an algorithm. It can be a diagnostic procedure. It doesn't necessarily have to correspond to a physical, tangible product that would be sold. And
Craig,
here's the
I'm
most
sorry to interrupt, but I just want to give you a 5-minute warning.
Great, all right. And the most important thing, the technology must be new. It must never have been published, not even by you. If you ever plan to patent something, you need to make sure that you don't publish it first, because if you have published it before you submitted your patent application, you might be out of luck. Always show it to the patent office before you put it in a journal or even put it on your own personal website. What kinds of information is out there that can blow up a patent? Well, basically anything. Anything in a journal article, anything in an old patent, even anything you've published on your own personal research website. If it's out there before you file your provisional patent application, it might stop you from getting a patent. So the first step in the process is filing the provisional patent application. Then you can go ahead and publish or present or otherwise disseminate your information. And that's all my prepared remarks. And if we have a few minutes left, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Craig. We've got questions flowing in. So just in the interest of time, maybe I'll read them, and I don't know if you're also able to see them, Craig.
If you could just dictate them to me, yes, please.
Absolutely. So Joshua asks, you discussed patenting different formulations of a drug. Can you also patent simple derivatives of your drug compound? If so, how would simple derivatives be defined in comparison to extensively modified new separate structures?
Mainly, there are two kinds of derivatives that tend to come up in the pharmaceutical industry. Number one is salts. Salts are basically interchangeable with one another. If you have a drug product that is a hydrochloride salt and you want to switch to the hydroacetate salt, you may very well have different pharmacokinetic behavior. It may behave differently in the human being, but it's not going to change much of anything by means of how you're going to patent it or how you're going to get it through the FDA. The other way that you would make a derivative is by changing a covalent chemical bond of the compound, removing a hydrogen atom and putting on a chlorine atom. That is now a completely new composition of matter. is entitled to a completely new patent application with a new 20 or 21 years. But in the FDA, you're starting over from scratch because that is now a new chemical entity. Changing one atom, you're not allowed to continue that clinical study. You're starting a new clinical study with a new drug.
Great. We also have a question around formulation patents. Some IP strategies use broader patents that cover several possible different formulations. In that case, can you still file a later patent with a different formulation to extend coverage?
Basically, you can file a patent on anything that you have not disclosed in a single document previously. So any new formulation you come up with, absolutely, you can put in a new patent. And frequently, what I would do is I would tell a company, when you're at the primitive stage of developing the formulation, let's file a broad net patent that is generic in detail and is likely to catch wherever you land when you finally figure out what your real formulation is. And when the day comes that you figure out what your real formulation is, then let's file a second patent application on exactly what you are administering to the human being. We can have it both ways. We can have the big umbrella patent that protects our drug in combination with any kind of buffer. And then 2 years later, when we've settled on an acetate buffer, we file a new patent application on the acetate buffer and try to get two patents, one on the exact formulation and then the broader umbrella patent on any kind of buffer formulation.
This is reminding me, yesterday we heard from Dr. Greg Raskin, who you may know, Craig, and he mentioned Gleevec, and it's reminding me of the crystallization patent on the two forms, like the right-handed and left-handed version of Gleevec.
Well, this is absolutely true. You can get a new patent simply by getting a new diffraction pattern out of a crystal. You can even, to all the organic chemistry geeks out there, you can even get a new patent on taking a drug that is historically marketed as a mixture of stereoisomers and purifying it down to a pure enantiomer and marketing the enantiomer. Really, that's how creative you can be.
Got two good questions, and I'll go to Marie's first, and thank you, Annika. Thank you, Hannah and Joshua, for your previous questions. I'll go to Marie's first because Anika has asked an advice question, so maybe we'll close on the advice question. Mm-hmm. So Marie's question is around how do patents interact with public health, especially with regards to the COVID vaccines in general. Can you patent things that are needed for general public survival and are essentially free, which would result in a loss for the company? How might you be able to patent these? Or
the simple answer is yes. You can patent pretty much anything as long as it hasn't been published already. But the more complex answer is, just because something is patented doesn't necessarily influence the way it would be used for a public health purpose. For example, patents cannot be used to block the activities of healthcare providers or the activity of a person in need of therapy. You can't sue a doctor. Even if you have a patent on a drug and a doctor is administering the drug, you can't sue the doctor for administering that drug. Under the letter of the law, taking a drug would be using the drug. Formally, when a patient takes the drug, they use the drug. They actually, a sick person who takes your drug infringes your patent. The law gives patients immunity from that. You're not allowed to sue a patient for infringing your patent just by using the drug. So basically, the law is structured to prevent people from using their patents in malicious ways to block that from happening. And in very special cases, the federal government has the power to create some kind of injunctive immunity that stops companies from enforcing patents in ways that would be counterproductive for a public health issue.
Thank you. We've got one more ethics related question, then we'll go back to the advice question. So from Rich, do we need to stop the recording?
No,
Um,
please go ahead.
Thanks. Rich asks, in today's New York Times, Zeynep Tufekci, if there's anyone Turkish on the line who can correct my pronunciation, please do. But how do you respond to today's op-ed about if the choice is between no vaccine and any vaccine, the precedence should go to whatever can be manufactured fastest, regardless of patents, nation of origin, or countries prioritizing their allies or wannabe allies?
That's a complex question that mixes science, patents, and politics. And for that reason, I'm not going to comment on that.
Fair. Last question from Anika. As someone who is very interested in pursuing patent law in the future, do you have any advice for how she can get more involved and learn about the industry as an undergraduate?
What I would definitely suggest you do is go to the website for the Practicing Law Institute and look for any free patent patent guides that they provide. They provide little primers for like introductory to IP law or patent office basics 101, where you can get some kind of scratch the surface type nutshell exposure to patent information to see whether it's of interest. The Practicing Law Institute is probably the best resource out there for that kind of information. What I don't suggest you do is read patents because they're long, they're boring, and the truth of the matter is most of them aren't very good. Actually, even when I hire new people, I tell them if you want to learn how to write patents, the worst thing you could ever do is read patents because we'll, for the most part, teach you the wrong way to do things.
Great. There is another quick advice one. I'm sorry we're going over
Sure.
everybody.
I have time. I'm fine.
Thank you, Craig. Any free CLEs that undergrads can attend, either to network, learn about patent law?
Oftentimes, yes. Oftentimes, some CLE providers will give free access to undergraduates. I do not know of any that I could direct you towards, but I would check with local law schools because oftentimes law schools will run what they call clinics in certain areas of law. That the word clinic has nothing to do with medicine. They just call them law clinics. And you may very well be able to get comped or pro bono attendance at some kind of an IP clinic where you could learn some basics at no cost and maybe even have the opportunity to talk briefly with some law school students or maybe even a law school lecturer. Law schools are a great place to look, and also the Practicing Law Institute, that's the best resource out there.
Terrific. I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you so much, Craig, for your time, for your ability to explain things in a very clear way.